This is going to be the last of a series of talks on what was Jesus really like. Over the past 3 weeks, we've looked at the kinds of things Jesus said and did. He persuaded destitute village communities to work together and look after each other on the basis of Old Testament laws. The authorities at the temple in Jerusalem were supposed to uphold those laws, but they didn't. Instead, they were enforcing Roman law. By his teaching and his community organizing, Jesus showed up the temple authorities for the turncoats that they were. Worse still, he undermined the economy of the temple. The temple made a lot of money out of people going there to offer sacrifices, hoping to be healed from their illnesses and allowed back to their home village. Jesus offered them healing and acceptance for free, and he did it on the basis of traditional Jewish teaching about what God is like. Of course, they were furious with him. The Gospels tell us Jesus was often in controversy with Jewish leaders, Pharisees, Sadducees, Herodians, scribes, and priests. All these groups were associated with the temple at Jerusalem. They were part of the hierarchy at the temple. For all we know, most of them probably resented Roman rule, but they accepted they had to collaborate with them. So, plenty of people were determined to get rid of him. Jesus had no illusions. He was likely to get killed. He warned his followers that if they kept the movement going, they would probably be killed too. They accused Jesus of claiming he could destroy the temple and forbidding people to pay taxes. We don't know what he did claim, but we do know that both of these were sore points. Paying taxes to the Romans with Roman coins meant accepting the supremacy of the Romans, and they understood this to be breaking the 10 Commandments. You will have no other God before me. You will not serve anybody else before me. According to the Bible, 600 years earlier, kings had failed to uphold God's law, and so the temple had been destroyed. Many people must have expected or even hoped that that would happen again. The more general accusation was that Jesus was stirring up the people with his teaching. This indicates that the Jesus movement was popular. So, the Romans put him to death. They could have sent a couple of soldiers to just bump him off any time. Would have been perfectly normal. But they gave him the full treatment. Crucifixion, to make it clear to everyone that Jesus was an enemy of the state. Crucifixion was designed to be excruciatingly painful. And that word excruciating comes from the Latin for a cross, right? The Roman author Quintilian explained the point. Whenever we crucify the guilty, the most crowded roads are chosen, where the most people can see and be moved by this fear. For penalties relate not so much to retribution as to their exemplary effect. It was a way of telling people, don't mess with us or you'll end up like that. What the Romans didn't do was round up his followers and crucify them too. They did that for other leaders of resistance movements, the violent ones, the military ones. But in the case of Jesus, they just crucified the one person. The reason they didn't crucify all his followers, Peter, James, John, and the others, is probably that Jesus' movement wasn't violent. Jesus threatened to disrupt the social order of his day, but not by fighting. Academics who study resistance movements have noticed that they often begin with one brave person who stands up against an oppressive authority. And then that one, Martin Luther King is an example, right? That one brave person stands up against the authority, gets arrested, killed, perhaps gets tortured as well. But because they stood up and had the courage to stand up and accept what happened, then other people find it within them to do the same. So we do know that many of the first Christians followed Jesus to torture and death. His bravery made them brave. Soon after his death, some people said they had seen Jesus risen from the dead. Here we have a problem. The resurrection has been hijacked by the modern idea of miracle. Now, what I mean by this is, since the rise of modern science, about 300 years ago, people have got used to the idea that the world operates according to unbreakable laws of nature. The resurrection breaks the laws of nature, so some say it can't possibly have happened, and others say it proves the truth of Christianity. At the time of Jesus, nobody would have thought in either of those ways. If you want to know exactly what happened and how it happened, the New Testament really isn't that helpful. It has 5 accounts of the resurrection. They're all different from each other. Why? Because the New Testament isn't concerned about working out scientifically exactly what happened. What it's concerned about is what it meant. What mattered was what God was saying to the Jesus movement by showing them Jesus risen from the dead. They thought God was saying something like, Jesus was right. Carry on doing the work he began. Something like that. So they did. The first Christians knew perfectly well that they were continuing a movement of defiance. They were saying publicly that God's government was better than the government of the ruling classes, whether Roman or Jewish. To make the point as clearly and defiantly as they could, they borrowed the titles officially bestowed on the Roman emperor and applied them to Jesus. Archaeologists have found inscriptions calling the Roman emperor the Lord, Son of God, Savior of the world. The early Christians applied these same titles to Jesus. It was a way of saying, we reject the authority of the Roman government. Our emperor is Jesus. "300 years later, that got turned on its head. Christianity became the main cult of the Roman Empire. From then on, Roman emperors didn't want to know that their predecessors had crucified Jesus. They couldn't deny it, so they retold the story. They said the crucifixion was all stitched up by God, and the Romans were just puppets carrying out God's plan. Those titles the early Christians had given to Jesus as an act of defiance then got reinterpreted as statements of imperial authority. God governs the world, Christ governs on behalf of God, the emperor governs on behalf of Christ. Therefore, everybody should do what the emperor says. And in this way, Christian emperors became oppressive warmongers, just like pagan emperors. That imperialist vision of Christianity is now, of course, well known. It is spread all over the world. But crack the nut, and inside the kernel is as nutritious as ever. At the time Jesus died, his movement had no power, no money, no friends in high places. All they had was a vision of a better society based on Jewish beliefs about how God has designed us to live at our best. That's all. They proclaimed it, knowing they were likely to be killed for it. Yet after 300 years, they conquered the Roman Empire. And after 2,000 years, 2 billion people call themselves Christians. Well, this is the end of my series on talks on the historical Jesus. If you'd like to discuss it tonight, this evening's service is really going to be just a discussion on Jesus. So if you'd like to come and join us and talk about it, you would be most welcome. I hope to have shown that when we focus on the historical Jesus, he is as relevant today as ever. The issues he addressed, war, poverty, and illness, are still with us. What he said and did about them are things we could say and do today. He said and did what he said and did because of his confidence that a better world is possible, a world with no wars, no poverty, and no suffering. He had this confidence because he believed the world has been designed by a good God, a God who intends to bless everyone and give us happy lives. He believed a world like that really is possible. So there we are. Was he right? Can we believe it's possible? And if we do, how can we help?